Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. This is a new series I'm going to be trying out where I'm going to have a look at every film based on a Marvel comic book that's ever been made. I have had to whittle the list down a little bit just because of availability, but hopefully as time goes on more will get released and we'll be able to have a look at those. So we're going to start off with the 1986 film Howard the Duck, directed by Willard Huyck. I think that's how you pronounce his name, not 100% sure, but wow. So I didn't know a lot about the film going into it. I knew it had a bad reputation. It's classed one of the worst films ever made. Howard the Duck wasn't a character I was overly interested in when I was younger, but I thought, I've seen Green Lantern, how bad can this really be? So just to give you an idea of the story, we start with Howard and his own planet, which is exactly the same as ours apart from it's run by ducks. He then gets transported to our planet and meets Marty McFly's mum, who's a rock star in this film. She doesn't really know what to do, so she says she'll help him out get home. She enlists the help of the guy who escaped Shawshank, who also doesn't have a clue what to do. So they go and see another scientist who just so happens to be the principal from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Turns out he brought Howard here by accident. And then he becomes a demon thing. So Howard, Marty McFly's mum and the guy from Shawshank team up to try and stop him taking over the world. It's a pretty messed up story, but it's meant to be silly. This film isn't going to win any Oscars or Golden Globes, and it's not designed to do that. The best way I found to watch this film is to treat it like a B-movie, because that's essentially what it is. You can't begin to compare it to the films in the MCU or even the early X-Men films, because comic book films still weren't taken seriously back in the 80s. And if you start looking at it through that lens of a B-movie, it makes it a little bit more enjoyable to a certain degree. It is a low-budget film pretending to be a blockbuster, essentially. There are a few big 80s names, most notably probably Lea Thompson, who had just been in Back to the Future a year before, playing Marty McFly's mum. I think she does the best job that she can do with the material she's given. There's a lot of mentions of quack fu and other duck-based puns, which I was actually quite impressed they managed to squeeze as many in as they did. That was quite impressive. You've got Tim Robbins as well, who plays a bumbling scientist who's just trying to get Howard back to look for the fame. Far from his best performance, but as a campy sort of bumbling scientist going along, yeah, he does okay. And then you've got Jeffrey Jones, who is the principal from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Far from his best performance. As the demon, he was less than convincing, completely over the top. I preferred him when he was a scientist, but I see why they did it. Otherwise it would be a bit boring if you just had a couple of scientists knocking about doing science stuff. Ed Gale plays Howard the Duck, voiced by Chip Zien. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Again, I'm not entirely sure. It's pretty good. Howard's got a distinctive role in the film. He's got a distinctive character. And Ed Gale's performance is probably the best one in the film. So in terms of specific scenes, there's a couple of scenes which I didn't like where Lea Thompson is almost Howard's love interest and almost tries to seduce him in one scene. That was really weird. It didn't work for me. I found it a bit too odd for my liking. The action scenes, they were okay, and by okay I mean passable. Probably one of the highlights of the film is where Howard beats up the girl band's manager. That was pretty good. That was okay. It was probably the highlight of the film. But what I didn't like was Howard's whole motivation throughout the entire film is to get home, back to his home planet. And in the end, he just stays on Earth and becomes the girl band's manager, which I found really disappointing. I think it would have been better if they'd have actually sent him home and he kept the mementos and looked back on it with, sadness or happiness or however they were going to play it. Maybe they knew there wasn't going to be a sequel, so they had to wrap it up somehow, but that was really disappointing how it ended. It felt like the whole story from beginning to that point was a complete waste of time. So is it as bad as people say it is? Yes and no. like I said earlier, if you try and compare it to the newer Marvel films from the MCU or the X-Men films, you're going to be disappointed because it doesn't even stand up to those films. And it's not meant to. This was a time where comic book films weren't taken seriously. But if you treat it like a B-movie, I think it is fairly enjoyable. Yes, the writing's atrocious and the acting is pretty poor on the whole, but as a film is fairly enjoyable if you set your expectations to the level of a low budget film. Something which I did find interesting, or I have started to find interesting, is that they have brought Howard back in a couple of the MCU films, like Guardians of the Galaxy. He's in a post-credit scene and he shows up a couple of times in the series What If. I wonder if perhaps this is making amends for previously poorly reviewed films, like they have been doing with Thor: The Dark World and The Incredible Hulk. I could be wrong, but I think it's interesting that they've brought Howard the Duck into that universe. So overall, I am going to give Howard the Duck a 4 out of 10. It's not as bad as people say, but it's certainly not a good film either. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll join me for as we go through the rest of the Marvel films in this series. Please like and subscribe, and until next time, keep watching movies.